Shalom and welcome to another and special edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elia Malamed, Highland Park Conservative Temple, Congregation Anshe Emet in Highland Park, New Jersey. Joining me, my good friends. Hey, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Shechter, Long Island, and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski at the Anshe Chesed in New York City. Hello, gentlemen. It's great to see you both. We are Parsha Tzav. We are recording this on Erev Pesach. Well, Erev, I guess.
Triple Erev.
The unusual 12% of the time occurrence of Pesach, Erev Pesach Chal b'Shabbat. But we're also going to talk about Parsha Tzav, which is a really great Parsha. If you really get into Parsha Tzav, first of all, we will give you a reward. Okay, this is not the parsha that you turn to first, although when you dig deep into it, there is a tremendous amount of material in it. The first thing that we want to think about when we talk about Parsha Tzav is that Parsha Tzav reflects a shift in focus. Okay, the parsha starts with Vayidaber Adonai Moshe lemor Tzav et Aharon ve'et banav. How is this a shift of focus, Rabbi Barry Chesler?
So the first 5 chapters of Vayikra present the principal sacrifices from the point of view of the offerer, the Israelite who brings his animal or his grain to the altar and makes a sacrifice. In chapters 6 and 7, which is most of Parshat Tzav, we have the sacrifices from the point of view of the offerer, the priest, and this will contain some variations on what the offerer is told in the beginning chapters.
So in other words, it's a focus, and it's a focus directly to the Kohanim. And we have to establish here that the Kohanim are in a pre-consecrated state. They're still not yet charged with the service. They are going to be told at the end of this Parsha how to do that. We saw something like that at the end of the book of Shemot. But at the end of this Parsha, we will be dealing with the instructions for how the Kohanim are ordained, what Moshe will do with them. Prior to that, yeah, go ahead.
So the list of sacrifices in chapters 6 and 7 reflects that, because the one sacrifice that is different is the special sacrifice for the ordination of the Kohanim, which is mentioned only in the section for the Kohanim and not in the section for the Israelites.
All right, so now one specific thing that occurs at the beginning is something that we often connect to a key feature of the shul. And Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski, you happen to be standing in my screen right underneath the Ner Tamid. Just go to point to it. So you just have to adjust your screen a little bit. Your Ner Tamid there you go, the Ner Tamid. So can you draw a dotted line, a straight line to this parsha, to the Ner Tamid? Is there any connection?
Well, there is a dotted line. I mean, there are two in the temple or tabernacle architecture as described in the books of Vayikra and Bamidbar. There are two sort of highly poetic, in tabernacle terms and temple terms, quite specific, but in poetic, in post-temple or post-tabernacle terms, quite poetic sources, which are in our parsha, Eish Tamid Tukad al HaMizbeach Lo Tichbeh, a perpetual fire, or tamid in the Bible probably does mean daily, as opposed to a more adverbial kind of like perpetual. But you are supposed to keep the fire always burning on the altar. Don't let it go out. And then in Numbers, in I forget the number of the chapter, but Behalotcha is the parsha. Every single day, Aaron lights the lights, and those are also described as being perpetual and tamid. And it's just tremendously poetic, because we strive to create holy spaces that always have the fire burning. And so by the time we have our post ancient synagogues, or medieval or into our modern synagogues, we love the fact and we celebrate the fact that we always keep the fire burning. It signifies that it's always open, it's always alive, it's always vigorous. And so I just find this comment about always keep the fire burning. It's a Matityahu song. He appreciates Eish Tamid, continually. The fire burns, continuously. And I just find this tremendously moving as spiritual guidance, right? Not only technical guidance for a holy space, that there should always be radiance, but you have to ask yourself, how do I nurture that sense of interior enthusiasm, as we were talking about before the call began, fired by enthusiasm.
Fired up. We're fired up.
We have to mention that here we have an example where technology brings us great convenience, but also limits our participation. And part of the change from the regular or the daily offering to the eternal or perpetual flame has to do with technology. Now, most of us use electricity, and so we don't really tend to the eternal light, right? We only notice when it goes out and we have to change the light bulb.
Yeah.
But in the Mishkan and in the temple, the fire it required work to keep it going. And so the Kohanim were always involved in keeping the fire going, and it presents a very different model of religious worship and religious enthusiasm.
You know,
we were talking about, before we went on, we were talking about the fact that the ancient rabbinic sources note that certain clans were responsible for firewood, like their job in the temple was firewood. And they brought it day after day after day, and it was exactly as Barry said, it was its own hard work. I mean, this particular one, I'm having a little smile at this because, I mean, I bet you at least 10 and possibly 15 years ago, as this environmental thing, I put in this low water, low energy LED bulb in there, and it's still going, baby.
It's still going.
Still going.
Well, it's so interesting, you know, that in the secular world, the eternal flame, which does have some kind of quasi-religious significance, is a memorial flame. I know in front of the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, there is an eternal flame, and it's right there in the middle, and it's something very moving to see. It's in a fountain, and it's gushing up, and it's a memorial flame, and memorial flames are kept eternally, and I think it touches the same notion of sacrifice, because who are we remembering? We are remembering those who sacrificed themselves, their lives, for the sake of our freedom and the sake of our survival. So in a way, we have changed. I would go anthropologically into this direction, that the flame represents something. I want to add one more thing, which is the fact that the flame on the altar was to be kept burning eternally had a very important function. One is that they didn't need to light it all the time, and assuming that in an era when, you know, the portability of fire or the creation of fire was not so simple, that was an added advantage. But more importantly, the perpetuation of the flame meant that it was continued from the original ignition of the flame, namely when the sanctuary altar gets inaugurated, the fire comes out of heaven. So every single thing that is going to be offered up on the altar from that point on has is related to the first flame. It's been kindled by the first combustion. That has triggered that. I mean, in chemical terms, it's all related to that.
That's, you know, Elliot, that is, I mean, this is you know, you and I sometimes will sort of be on like we were last week about,
Sure,
about, you know, whether the laying hands on the sacrifice was about establishing honest and appropriate chain of ownership and designating it. Was it about like identifying the self with the sacrifice? You and I sometimes will be on different sides of like just how mythic we want to get about these things. But what you just said is to me a really interesting and vivid example. Like, okay, so you or I might say, you know, back from Moshe's time until the destruction of the temple by Nebuchadnezzar, what, do you really think that it never went? The experience of being an Israelite, the experience of being a Jew, is all about feeling, you know, Vatetze eish milifnei Adonai, and v'tochal et ha'olah, the fire comes from before the Lord and consumes the sacrifice, and boom, triggers this whole thing that never goes out, to this very day, to feel like continuous, I'm part of this. It's like, it's so intense that even if you don't believe it as a fact, I think you're sort of called upon to believe it as a truth, as Aristotle says, sometimes poetry is truer than history, and this is one of those cases.
Well, it's interesting you mention that because we're not a reliquary religion. We don't keep things around, in the ark that are relics. But we do have that sensibility with regard to text because we truly believe that the Tanakh that we have, the Masoretic text that we use, is pretty much the same text that was composed and compiled and edited and put together from 2,500 how many years ago during the exile, etc. I mean, that process itself, complicated as it is, every time we open a Tanakh, we are making that kind of contact. Especially, this week there was something in the news about a discovery or rediscovery of an ancient scroll, fragments of scroll from the Dead Sea, and another Dead Sea caves. These are things that are so exciting because they really do connect us to our past. Barry, you wanted to say something?
So I wanted to make a comment about nomenclature. So I was thinking when you were talking that it would be interesting to know when the name Meir came to be more popular in the Jewish tradition,
Sure.
because Meir is someone who brings the light. So, the Rabbi Meir we know is post-destruction of the temple, and the name that we associate with light before the destruction of the temple is Uriah, where the light is God. And then we go to the man making his own light. The other thing that I wanted to say is that what we're talking about with the fire coming from God and then carrying forward is the flip side of the Ke'ilu moment in the Haggadah. In the Haggadah, we read ourselves back into history, but the comment about the light being connected to the eternal flame, or as we were talking earlier, the original rabbis being connected to Moshe, is projecting from a moment forward. And what I was thinking about is that when Notre Dame caught fire a year or so ago, there was a great break in tradition because this thing that had been built 700-800 years ago, that had stood in the skyline of Paris for so long, was suddenly not there. And people realized that there was this
part of their lives, a part of their landscape is gone. Yeah.
Well, we feel that, I mean, we New Yorkers feel that about 9/11. I mean, I bought a photograph actually just after 9/11. It's like, it's a slightly schlocky but still beautiful photograph after 9/11 as a Lower Manhattan, and there's the Brooklyn Bridge and the Woolworth Tower and the Twin Towers in a line.
Yeah.
And it struck me, it's so cool, so well composed as a photograph, these major achievements of New York architecture.
Wow. So you want to hear cool? We got to talk about fat. Okay, the chayla.
Fat. You gonna show a picture?
I don't want to show you the picture.
Oh, you show the picture.
You want to show the picture? I don't want to show the picture. Tell the people
just the animal, not the rest.
Just a second. I'll show you the picture. Never mind. So you can imagine that these are the fat enclosed organs, okay, of an animal. You're not allowed to eat, and not only you're not allowed to eat, but they became a significant part of the sacrifice. Okay, now bear me out. I did some research on this. I read Mary Douglas's Leviticus as Literature, one of the most spellbinding books on Leviticus you would ever read. Barry,
when did you fall asleep on page?
Never mind. Some of us really enjoy this stuff. Okay, so she says as follows. Now listen to this. Okay, she says, what you're doing when you make a sacrifice, okay, you are piling the animal in different ways. At the bottom is the head and the upper cavity of the animal, the ribs. Then you have the chalev, which is the suet fat, the hard fat, with the liver and the kidneys. And then you have the innards, and you have the other procreative organs on the top. And everything gets ignited, and it lifts up. And she says as follows: this is to connect the worshiper to both the architecture of the Mishkan, which had the outer court, the inner court, and the Kodesh Kodeshim, and also the Mount Sinai, which had the base, the middle, and the top. from the middle and the top, the cloud covered, she says the chalev, the fat suet, white suet, was representative of the cloud. And she is saying that the drama of offering a sacrifice is a constant recreation of the Sinai experience.
Whoa.
And also encapsulates the Mishkan in the act of sacrifice itself, so that the worshiper is experiencing the covenantal moment as the worshiper is bringing the sacrifice.
It goes more than that, because the way you described it, we have Sinai as a vertical experience,
yes,
and the Mishkan is a horizontal experience.
right.
And the sacrifice combines the two.
That's right. So
Spectacular.
It
But
is
let me
spectacular.
ask you a question about that.
So Yasher Koach, Elliot.
Thank you,
That really
you,
was
thank you.
spellbinding. But let
Thank
me
you,
ask you a
thank
question.
you.
I didn't entirely understand one thing. So you described, I guess, an olah, which is totally burned. What about the various zvachim that are mostly eaten? Like, I mean, whatever.
Here's your Mishkan, okay? Here's your mountain, and here's the pile of the sacrifice. So at the bottom is your head and your front. This is the suet, the fat, and this is the innards, okay? And this is at the top. That's what an olah looked like. It was chopped up. Then you had the suet in the middle, and then you had the guts, okay? And this was the mountain. The people are at the base of the mountain. The cloud is at the top, and Moshe is at the top. And this is the Mishkan. The Mishkan is the outer court. So the suet, the chalev, is right here at the veil between the outer court and the inner court. Sorry, it's this veil, and the Holy of Holies. This is where the suet is. And so you can see, Barry, you're absolutely right. You know, the sanctuary represents it in a linear plane. The mountain is in a three-dimensional. And I thought it's such a brilliant analysis of it. I had to share it with our viewers and listeners.
That is totally brilliant. But I just wanted to return to the one question, like, what is the edible parts?
No edible parts.
No, in the olah there's not. But what if it's a todah or
so you don't eat the chalev. Chalev is not permitted. Precisely like blood, it has this representation. She says her claim is blood is related to life. The chalev is related to the anan. The chalev is and therefore, because it's godly in representation, you don't eat it. It's a brilliant.
I got this part, but I'm saying that for those sacrifices that you do eat,
yes.
What happens? Because the chalev is also offered.
You throw it onto the altar; it burns up.
So the interesting,
so you put the edible parts on top, and then at a certain point you just remove them.
That's correct. Yeah,
okay.
It's like your barbecue.
And some of them were boiled. Some
were boiled, right.
But what's interesting is that the suet, the way you describe it, is in the middle. It's not on top. So it's a bridge. It's not representing God. It's our avenue to God, because
exactly, absolutely.
What belongs to us is going to go on top of it, and there's going to be a mixing of both a going up and a going down.
And by the way, suet, it's not permissible food. We do not eat that fat. It's discarded. And in non-Jewish cuisine, it's actually used to be rendered. It makes a real thick fat and a tallow. It goes into candles, and also in 19th century, 18th century food, it becomes like a shortening. It's just you just don't want your suet. I don't know. Anyway, on that note, we got to shift. Go ahead.
And that was very, very good for everyone's cardiac health. And
Right. Heart Association thanks you.
Wait, we're talking about the fat tail. There's a video. There's this guy on YouTube. He's like in Azerbaijan or whatever. He took the fat tail of a sheep, and you see the guy. He's like having this bliss experience by barbecuing and roasting the fat. Fat. Anyway, the end of the parsha is the ordination ceremony. We're going to talk about it at Shmini when everything goes wrong. The point is that the parsha has as its culmination the instructions for how the Kohanim get to be priests. One little moment here is that they have to be sequestered for 7 days. And 7 days is very, very significant. 7 days is a transition phase. It's the passage time. When a baby is born, male baby, 7 days. 7 days for a wedding, 7 days of Shiva, 7 days of Sukkot, and 7 days of Pesach. And that is how we're going to get into Pesach now. We're going to shift gears completely. Feel the clutch here and going to change gears. Halach ma'anya. We are sitting down to the Seder Saturday night. We can't wait to experience the joy of our redemption and the ability to gather together. Some of us may be gathering with more people, some with less. We wish everyone a beautiful Pesach, but we want to share a couple of thoughts. Halach ma'anya. Let's talk about the bread of affliction. Barry Chesler.
So this is one of my favorite passages, the Halach Ma'anya. At the very beginning of the Seder, we lift the matzah and call it the bread of affliction. This is the bread that we imagine our ancestors ate in Egypt. By the time we make hamotzi a little later in the Seder, it's going to become the bread of freedom. And it's a kind of transubstantiation, as it were, in a Jewish form, where the same matzah that represents slavery is now going to represent freedom. And what I really, really like about this is that the present exists every year in the same place. That now we are slaves, next year we will be free. That even though we have experienced the Exodus mythically, personally, historically, every year we come to the Seder as slaves, and we have to do our spiritual work so that we can taste freedom by the time we get to the meal.
Yeah, it's a very complicated announcement, this halach ma'anya. I also think that it's the device for locating yourself. Hashata hacha means here we are. And when you stop and meditate on here we are looking ourselves in terms of time. Jews are always looking at themselves in a dual, at least a dual time. We have our secular time and our Jewish time, but I did some calculation. I consulted a chart. You know what year this is since the Exodus? This is year, according to this guy who I don't know his name here. This is year 3,333. Cool. Okay.
Cool.
3,333 since the Exodus, and if you're counting from that moment, that's the time. So I estimated a 40-year generation. So I did the following exercise. Listen, bear me out here. It's about 3,330 years ago. That's about 80 something, 90, maybe 100 generations. Sit in your shul, okay? And beside you is your father. Beside your father is your grandfather. Beside your grandfather is your great-grandfather. Beside your great-grandfather is your great-great-grand, and on and on and on and on. All you have is about 100. And you know what the great joy is? That I may not be able to speak the same language as my 100th ancestor, but I have the same story. It's just unbelievable.
It's not just the same story. You have the same experience because of that great line, Ke'ilu. That is why we have to look at ourselves as if we left Egypt, because the story is not enough.
That's awesome. Ben Gurion has had this great line, about the Mayflower, and he said something about the Mayflower, and you Americans, you write down the name of the people in the Mayflower. I don't know the names of the people who were at my founding event, but I know what they had for dinner.
Yeah.
So I want to say just a word about halach ma'anya, and we talked about the Barry mentioned in particular the kind of ambivalence of the symbol. I don't mean ambivalent and feeling ambivalent. I mean the multi ways that it can go. It's the bread of freedom. It's the bread of oppression. It's the lechem oni. It's the bread of poverty. It's the symbol of liberation. It's the lechem asher onim alav dvarim harbeh. It's called lechem oni as a pun on the question, the bread on which you answer lots of questions or something. But I did have one of my new Haggadot this year, the fruits of freedom, the botanical Haggadah by a fellow I know here in New York named John Greenberg, he's a science teacher at the Heschel High School. He's also a Talmid Chacham, and he's got a very lovely Haggadah, which you can find on his website called Torah Flora, It's about biblical botany and ancient botany and what you can learn about Jewish tradition from that stuff. And he has a great comment about the unleavened quality of the bread. He notes that like commercially available yeast is pretty much of a modern product, right? Like they certainly didn't have it in the ancient world, and even in the ancient world, and even in medieval times, it was like tied to brewing. You certainly didn't have the easy ability to get yeast, and bread was basically made by sourdough, fermenting dough, which you kept. And he doesn't say this, but the point is that you at Passover every year you throw out last year's dough, starting anew, and that is a great act of faith that this coming year is going to be brand new. But one of the things that he said about the lechem oni part is that Egypt was a technologically very sophisticated society, and it did have a big brewing industry, and so it had relatively better access to yeast, and you could produce all kinds of for the ancient world like advanced kind of bread, and unleavened bread is something that shepherds would eat. So, and to this day, Bedouin, I think, are more oriented towards unleavened bread. So his claim is that part of the experience of Pesach is leave behind the technologically advanced and morally corrupt society of Egypt for a kind of outward poverty, but inner purity, right? They were going back to being their Bedouin ancestors. They're going back to being Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're going back to being shepherds, and they were like consciously leaving. They were consciously archaizing and leaving behind all that fancy bread making.
That's a fascinating comment. The shepherd really is the archetype of the free person, the free, as opposed to the farmer. The shepherd is free to roam, and the farmer is connected to a specific patch of land. And of course, the farm creates a whole agricultural infrastructure that is then taken advantage of by monarchs. So
it also creates civilization, and we shouldn't lose sight of that.
Of course.
The part of agriculture is the culture part. So I want to offer a slightly different interpretation here. That I like what Jeremy said about the shepherd and the unleavened bread, but what we need to remember as well, that unleavened bread or bread belongs to the farmer. And the original farmer was Cain. The original shepherd was Abel. Yes. When we bring the Pesach, the Korban Pesach, the shepherd's offering, together with the matzah, the farmer's offering, we are creating a kind of cosmic harmony that we want in our own lives.
I would disagree with you. I think we're creating a disjunction to the farm. I think we're separating ourselves from that locked existence. I know we need it, of course we need it, but we're at a primitive stage of Israel's history where they're either romanticizing their shepherd past.
Let's just say about Barry's point though, each of these things can be true about romanticizing the shepherd or leaving behind whatever technological sophistication, but this is the holiday of family togetherness.
Sure.
It's the holiday where on Shabbat HaGadol we imagine that Elijah will return the hearts of the parents towards the children towards the parents. And one could imagine like the age old, in the words of, I forget who was the lyricist, Rodgers or Hammerstein or whatever, but the cowman and the farmer should be friends, but they never are because they have separate interests. And so if you have al matzot umurorim yochluhu, you have to have both of those people. You have to have the meat raiser, and you have to have the bread grower, and you have to have Pesach together, which maybe heals that murderous Cain Abel trouble.
Okay, good.
Very nice.
All right, let's go to the mitzvah avadim hayinu, and it goes through that, and it says afilu kulanu chachamim kulanu nevanim kulanu zkenim kulanu yodim et Torah, even though they're all wise, all excellent, discernible, all elderly, and all knowing the Torah. Mitzvah aleinu lisaper. We are commanded to lisaper, to tell. Rabbi Jeremy Kamenovsky, we are commanded to tell. What does that mean?
commanded to tell. Well, the three of us have spoken in the past about the rabbis know how to talk about learning. There's a specific verb for reading the Bible, which is koreh, and there's a specific verb for learning Mishnah, which is shoneh, and there's a different verb which is used here, which is to tell a tale. Okay, and I think that there's a difference in the experience of telling a tale, telling a narrative, than in conventional Torah study. I happened to look in the Mishnah says what the Haggadah says. The Haggadah is a quotation of the Mishnah, and it's mitzvah saper b'tzias Mitzrayim. You have to tell the tale. I looked in the Tosefta, which for those of our listeners here, Tosefta is like the stuff that didn't make it into the Mishnah of the same era.
Cutting room floor of the Mishnah.
Cutting room floor, and in the Tosefta it says that you have to, and that story of the rabbis who stayed up all night. It says that they were oskim behilchot hachag. They were studying the laws, and notably so the Mishnah knows that that's a phrase in its disposal, and it chooses not to use it.
Yeah.
It says, and we don't study the laws of Pesach. We don't koreh. We don't read the Bible. We don't shoneh. We don't study the Mishnah. We tell a tale, and that is, I think, a broader, broad. It is a broader because it has greater content than either koreh or shoneh.
Yeah.
But it's also more broadly accessible. More people can be involved in this, and I think listen. This is a religion in which telling a tale is where you, as an individual Jew, find the meaning of your life in a story that's bigger than your life.
Barry Chesler.
Well, what I would add is that telling means that we have to hear, that a story that is told must be heard. And hearing is a special sense. We see much farther than we can hear, but hearing connotes an understanding that is not always accessible when we see things. And I think that the image I have is of people having to tell the story because this is a communal story. It's not an individual story. If we're just reading a book, that's our own experience. Even if we're alone, we have to say it out loud because someone has to hear. There's one imperative that all Jews know, even though we don't always see it, and that is Shema. We're supposed to listen, we're supposed to understand, and by telling it, we have a kind of access that we hope and sometimes get to God, because our invisible God speaks through a voice, and that voice we can hear, and God can hear our voice. I think that also is part of our telling of the story, that we are speaking to God.
You both raise a fascinating valence to this, that it's a communicative, it's a imaginative, it is essential in terms of the way that we transmit the story. I just want to share with you a quote. I wrote it in my own in the shul supplement here about storytelling. You could both recall our Friday evenings at Ramah. I dabbled in storytelling. Goes back a long time.
Great.
But I studied with the best. Okay, and there's a woman named Ruth Sawyer has a book called The Art of the Storyteller, and her quote is as follows: "Not a clever sharing of the mind alone, but rather a sharing of heart and spirit. To be a good storyteller, one must be gloriously alive." And I think that so captures the sense of l'saper b'tzias Mitzrayim. This is the night that we have to be alive. We have to be alive with full heart, with full soul, to convey with love and with joy and with delight and with food and with play and with all kinds of curiosity.
Don't forget wine.
You got it. All right, let's close out with Chayav Adam ki lirot et atzmo ki'ilu. A person has to see himself, herself, as if she left. You have to imagine. What is your favorite teaching on that very, very profound line of the Haggadah? I'm going to turn to Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski.
Oh, it's a great line. First of all, ki'ilu, I mean, religion is an imaginative exercise. It's not about the facts of the world. It's about seeing beneath, in between the lines and beneath the crust to what's within. And so ki'ilu really works beautifully. But I think my favorite little riff on that comes from a Hasidic master of the 19th century named Yitzchak Boyaner, who said, Chayav Adam lir'ot et atzmo. A person, people have to see themselves. Ve'az ki'ilu yatza mi'Mitzrayim. And then it's like you left Egypt.
Nice.
That moment of self-understanding with the meaning of your life, you as an individual, you as a member of the community, you see yourself, you're liberated.
Very.
I think there are many times in our lives when we want to start over, and sometimes we can't. But this reminds us that we can never start over, not ourselves and not as a people, that we have a past. The past has not always been glorious, and we have to remember each part of the past in order for us to be whole human beings.
So
Rabbi Malamet, what's your favorite?
I just heard a beautiful interview with Tova Feldsha, the actor, and she said, when I get on the stage, I get to spend 2 hours inside someone else's body. I get to spend 2 hours, inside someone else's life. A ki'ilu. I get to live ki'ilu, she's saying. And I think one of the things that the most important thing that we overlook at the Seder, the most important symbol at the Seder is you. You are the most important. You're not edible. Well, you're not edible, but you are the most important symbol. And you are there, Ki'ilu. You're representing all the 100 generations, your father and your mother, all the way back, all the way down. They're sitting with you in the sanctuary. I'm talking to them. We're here on a virtual space, so it's Ki'ilu, we're together. We have such profound experiences together, but it's chayav lirot et atzmeinu ki'ilu, and this is what we're sharing here. That let this evening be an evening of imagination, of curiosity, of joy, of delight, of life, of just embracing life and just embracing each other in the ways that we can, even in limited ways. So these are the things we want to share with you. So on behalf, but I'll let you guys say it yourselves. Chag Sameah, everyone. Good Yontif and Shabbos. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure. We look forward to joining you next week on another edition of Parsha Talk and Chag Talk, Pesach Talk, and Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameah.
Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameah.